Okay, everybody, we're still here and we're still fighting, and it's probably going to get a little bit worse before it gets better. And I understand completely why many of you are, at this point, giving up on the idea of even trying to help people understand why this is a scam. I get it. Like, somebody comes up to you and looks at you with an indignant energy and says, "Why aren't you taking this seriously?" There are a couple ways you could respond to that. You could respond in a way that's kind of pointed. Well, there's a million different ways you could respond to it, but one of them would be to simply say, because I'm not easily provoked into a state of irrational fear and obedience. That's really what this boils down to, is that the fear that they are feeling is irrational, and that can be objectively assessed. But they have to be willing to objectively assess it. And that's where you run into a problem. So if you were to reply with something like that, maybe it's a little bit pointed, it might not get the response that you ultimately want, because what you ultimately want is to help people understand that they've been manipulated. And that's just a very difficult thing to do, because the ego gets in the way and there's a problem there. So another way you might respond, here we go, is instead of pointing out that they've been manipulated into an irrational state of fear and obedience, would be to ask them a question honestly. Just ask them, are you reasonably good at math? And unfortunately, a lot of people aren't very good at math, and they're probably going to not know how to respond to that. And you could ask a follow-up question from there. You could say, well, have you done any of the math? Instead of just taking your cues regarding how deadly this is from the media and from the government, the government response to it, have you actually dug into the information to see in context whether or not the risk to your life warrants everything that has been done up to this point? And the truth of the matter is, no. The vast majority, if they had done that, they wouldn't be this afraid, because they would understand that the increase of death, the increase of risk of dying as a result of COVID-19 compared to other things that they have never been terrified of is minuscule. So that's the purpose of this world's fastest COVID-19 test. It's actually something that if you wanted to hand it out to people, you can print it and hopefully get around the egoic barriers, the protective egoic barriers that people have been sucked into, where they're in this state of intense anger and fear and judgment and everything else that has been intentionally provoked in them. So I'm going to read it real fast here. You can print it. If you print it on both sides, it's one sheet of paper. Hopefully this won't hurt any. Less than 1% of the population dies every year. However, due to COVID-19, this number will be higher in 2020. The purpose of this test is to determine whether the media and government have provided you an accurate perception of risk regarding COVID-19. Please read the question below and, based on what you've been led to believe, choose a response that's closest to what you feel is accurate. Once you've chosen, turn this paper over to see how well the media and government have done their job. Here's the question. Approximately what percentage of the global population will die in 2020 due to COVID-19? And here you'll see that we have very low, which would be 1/1000th of 1%, all the way up to, relatively speaking, what would be very high, 5% of the population. My guess is, if they've thought about this at all, especially opening with this statement, less than 1% of the population dies every year, they're probably going to guess somewhere in, based on, if they've taken their cues exclusively from the media and government reaction, they're going to be guessing in the 1 to 2% range. And people who don't have any idea how many people are on the planet are probably going to guess higher. So, next page, they flip it over and they get their answer. In 2020, COVID-19 is projected to kill approximately 1.5 million people globally. Therefore, the closest answer is B. Approximately 1/100th of 1% of the global population will die in 2020 due to COVID-19. For context, more than 10 times as many people die each year from cardiovascular disease, and approximately 60 million people die every year from all causes combined. And here I really thought about giving them the math for what it would take for it to reach 1/10 of 1%. So it would be 7.8 million people. So I thought about trying to work in here the idea that COVID-19 would have to kill as many people as it killed this year for 5 years straight before it even reached 1/10 of 1%. And by the time it reached 1/10 of 1%, that still would only be half. After 5 years, that would still only be half of what dies every year from cardiovascular disease. But I'm trying to keep it simple and short here. So anyway, we go into the next part. The media and government have led you and your loved ones to believe that COVID-19 poses a threat so great that it justifies censoring freedom of speech, house arrest, destruction of the economy, and illegally curtailing the most basic freedoms. It is untrue. Disease experts from Stanford, Oxford, and Harvard have authored a declaration that calls into question the safety and efficacy of the current global coronavirus policy. That declaration has now been signed by an additional 11,000 public health scientists and 30,000 medical practitioners. For more information, visit gbdeclaration.org. For more information on why this threat has been exaggerated and exploited, read or listen to Tragedy and Hope 101 for free at joeplumber.com. That's the biggest thing. The biggest obstacle we face is that they don't understand the mindset of the people who would intentionally fabricate fear and then exploit it for their political purposes. They just don't get it. At the bottom here, I have the math. So up here, I give the answer, but then there's a footnote, and here's the math down here. And this is what I just keep trying to bring people back to. I keep trying to help them get back to what the actual math is. So you've got all these parents who are terrified of sending their kids out to trick or treat. Halloween's right around the corner, and they're afraid of their kids catching COVID, and they don't understand that literally, last time I checked, I believe these numbers were based on the United States. Seasonal flu kills between 3 and 4 times as many children every year in comparison to what COVID-19 has actually killed. And in Sweden, they have like well over 1 million school kids and 0 deaths. So we return to this idea of it being irrational fear. It's irrational to be terrified of something that is a small fraction of the threat that you've already faced your entire life, year in and year out, without any fear whatsoever. I'm going to include a video here, which is the math part of COVID-19 on trial, something I did. I'll include a link to all this stuff. I'm going to include a link where you can go and you can download this flyer if you want to give it to people. It's going to be joeplumber.com/COVID. And it says, here's the COVID-19 test that you can give people. So you could just, if you want to give it a shot, you have something. And you can say it sincerely and without being angry. You're trying to help. Okay? There is also a flyer version of this video. So what I'll do is right now I'm going to play just the end of this video, which is the math segment, which tries to bring people back to the only way they can really create context is with the numbers. I'm going to play that, but if you want to watch the entire video, there will be a link to that. It's only it's about 6 minutes long, the entire video. Everything will be in the description. And also, yeah, there's a flyer version here too. I forgot to mention that. There's a flyer version of the video, which includes some of the cooler artwork that some really talented artists did for me to help me finish it. And this sheet of paper also, all of this information, it's basically the script for the video with some of the graphics, and it ends with the math scene. So, all right, here we go.
To really put this in perspective, Let's do some simple math on the blackboard. Prior to COVID-19, when we all lived normal lives, less than 1% of us died each year, 0.007 of the Earth's population. In 2020, with COVID-19, that number hasn't changed. It's still less than 1% of us. It's still 0.007 of the Earth's population. The impact of this pandemic on total annual deaths is so small that you have to move into the fourth decimal place to measure it. Even among the most vulnerable, those above the age of 70, COVID-19 would have to kill 4.5 million, 3 times the projected death toll, to reduce their survival rate below 99%. Does any of this sound like what you were led to believe? If not, then consider the harsh reality that you were intentionally misled. You were intentionally misled.